and we were good with that. And he knew some of it, right? Because he mentioned to me the Hollywood, which is the club that we went to, right? He mentioned Nick Siano, which is one of these DJs. This was a pioneer DJ who was the first. He was one of the first, part of that record pool, that very first record pool that played Give It Up and Turn It Loose by James Brown,
Mm-hmm.
Just Begun by Jimmy Castor, right? Baby Huey, Listen to Me, the Isley Brothers, Follow Me. I mean, all get into this. All these songs, were played by guys like Nick Siano, Francis Grasso, David Mancuso. As early as 70, I would say 71 was the big year, right? Because that's the year that this brother, and everybody could look this stuff up. This is not, these are facts, you know?
Right.
This brother, Alex Rosner, invented the mixer, right? For two turntables, right? And
Mm.
he invented it because he was the sound guy for these juice bars that I'll get into. He was the sound guy for them. So
Mm.
so he knew how genius these guys were. So he came up with this, and that changed clubbing and partying forever.
Mm.
Everybody went through these guys,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm.
Right? And these songs that I'm talking about did not hit the streets until like late 73, probably even 74. And they hit the streets because one of these DJs, his name was Eddie Rivera, right?
Mm.
You can look this up.
Mm-hmm.
He came up with a record pool that was inclusive of the brothers from the street, right? From our street culture that was not accepted in this other record pool. So he created a record pool called IDRC, right?
Mm.
And it was after he created this record pool that these songs made their way into the street community, right? The clubs in the Bronx, the clubs inside of Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some DJs from the Bronx were exposed because they were on the inside. They were part of the juice bar experience, right? But these DJs, again, they played in these juice bars. Juice bars are clubs.
Mm.
Right? And these songs that I'm talking about did not hit the streets until like late 73, probably even 74. And they hit the streets because one of these DJs, his name was Eddie Rivera, right?
Mm.
You can look this up.
Mm-hmm.
He came up with a record pool that was inclusive of the brothers from the street, right? From our street culture that was not accepted in this other record pool. So he created a record pool called IDRC, right?
Mm.
And it was after he created this record pool that these songs made their way into the street community, right? The clubs in the Bronx, the clubs inside of Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some DJs from the Bronx were exposed because they were on the inside. They were part of the juice bar experience, right? But these DJs, again, they played in these juice bars. Juice bars are clubs.
This prompted Mancuso to help set up the record pool, a coalition of DJs that would work together, and share any new information they got with the rest of the pool as soon as they could. Inaugurated on June 2, 1975 at 99 Prince Street, the home of the soon-to-be reopened Loft, the New York record pool established itself as the point of contact between record companies and the DJs. At the end of the first month, 183 DJs had joined the pool, and soon record companies would take it seriously. The New York record pool inspired the creation of other record pools, from Long Island to Los Angeles. At the end of the month, the New York pool invited music companies to a summit. More than 25 companies showed up, and many pledged to use the pool as a central distribution point for new records. The self-regulating, self-financed organization played a key role in the market. Each week, reporters guesstimated, its members played approximately 50 new releases to some 240,000 dancers, who left the discotheques to buy their favorite records, which were subsequently pushed by radio. David Mancuso became the president, while Vincent Ality became vice president, and Steve DeQuisto became secretary. The pool sought to legitimize their DJs, and each had to bring a letter from the club owner stating who they worked for, and signed with a corporate seal. In September 1975, the pool introduced feedback sheets, a move by Doug Riddick from Atlantic to deter the selling of free vinyl. From the very beginning, it was tough work for Mancuso and DeQuisto, but they managed to make it work. Until mid-September, when DeQuisto was caught offloading some records for profit, despite the "not for resale" warning printed on each. The tensions between Mancuso and DeQuisto had been growing, and when Mancuso felt that DeQuisto had a tarnished image in the eyes of the record company, he asked his friend to resign and stay on only as a consultant. DeQuisto was not interested in the idea and stormed off. Mancuso replaced him with Eddie Rivera, but after a few meetings he realized the DJ was up to something. When Mancuso missed a meeting and the minutes of that meeting were missing, he asked Rivera to resign. He did, also taking the Latin DJs with him, and went on to form the International Disco Record Center. David Mancuso and the split with Eddie Rivera, IDRC. I wanted to touch upon what I thought could be a thorny subject with David Mancuso, and that was the split with the late Eddie Rivera. Eddie Rivera was a DJ and member of Mancuso's New York record pool who, for reasons we will soon find out, started his own record pool called the International Disco Record Center. David Mancuso, I had to ask Eddie to resign. Anybody who had a hidden agenda or did anything to threaten the record pool, Mancuso was kind enough to give discomusic.com a thorough explanation, to which I will condense for the sake of brevity. In 1976, one of the officers of the New York record pool did something that was not acceptable, so Mancuso asked him to step down and replaced him with Eddie Rivera. Mancuso says, I found Eddie Rivera to be very friendly, intelligent and focused. A flag went up however when Eddie, said we should make a Latin music department, and I asked, why do you want to do that for? This is a pool. Records are coming from every different direction, we should get them from all labels period. That was my first indication that he was up to starting his own record pool. David Mancuso, who rarely missed a meeting, continues by explaining that every meeting was tape recorded as a record of events. However, on one occasion he was out of town and missed a meeting. On his return, Eddie Rivera tells David Mancuso that they all decided on certain issues during David's absence. Mancuso asks to hear the minutes, tape, to which he is told none exists. Mancuso says, I had to ask Eddie to resign. Anybody who had a hidden agenda or did anything to threaten the record pool, we were like an eggshell. We generated $4 million for the music industry in New York, and there was a lot of focus on this pool, and I really wanted this thing to be right. I asked Eddie to resign, which is what I think he wanted. There was obviously a split between Eddie and I, and then he decided to form his own pool, which is what he wanted to do from the very beginning.
They would play of different kinds of music. And so funk, to a great degree, was not really heard for the most part by the mass audiences.
Those lines were drawn. You know, black music is for black folks on black radio stations, and white music is for white folks on white radio stations. But now we found that the buying public could care less. They were just interested in music that made them move. But the
But according to Mancuso, the record companies didn't understand these new club DJs. They had no idea who was who, or which of them were breaking these records. So the labels responded by making it very difficult for the disco DJs to get a hold of promotional copies of new records, refusing to share their new records before they were released. They discriminated against disco DJs in favor of radio DJs. Even when they would give records to the disco DJs, labels would only let DJs go get records between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., remembers Mancuso. The record industry was exclusive. It was racist. I would just go buy my records. It was becoming harder and harder for the disco DJs to get new music from the labels, even though they were promoting their records better than the radio stations. Even though, as Mancuso says, in those days you didn't make any money playing records. You were lucky if you got paid. Mancuso and the other DJs found the situation incredibly frustrating, so frustrating that, as Mancuso tells it, he stayed up for 3 days in 1975, taking speed and thinking intensely about the issue until he came up with a solution. Mancuso and fellow DJ Steve D'Acquisto called all New York's disco DJs to a meeting at the Loft. DJs and DJs only met to figure this stuff out. And we did, he told me. I said, why don't we do something like a carpool? Something where we can all get together and pool our energies. The club DJs wrote a declaration of intent at the Loft, setting out the blueprint for what would become known as the record pool. The disco DJs who were breaking and promoting records presented themselves to the labels and convinced them that what they were doing was legit. The record companies would give us test presses, ask if there were no favors, no this, no that. It was eliminating payola. That was the beauty of it. The way to get your record distributed was to give us enough copies. That was it. If they sent us twice as many as we needed, I would send them back. I kept it really clean. Many people felt threatened by it, but we just wanted our records in exchange for feedback, and that's what it came down to. It was a great concept. It worked. There was no executive director, we were all DJs. The record pool would legitimize the club DJs. For DJs to belong to the pool, they had to pay a small subscription fee to cover postage and costs, and supply a letter on headed paper from the clubs they played at, stating how many nights they worked. In exchange for this supply of free records, the DJs had to supply written feedback to the labels about each new track, letting them know what worked and what didn't. The DJs got access to new music. The labels got a new kind of R&D department they could use to road test their products. It was brilliant. So brilliant that the record pool system is still used by labels and DJs all over the world today. Some people found everything I was doing very intimidating, Mancuso remembers. It took a lot of work to form this pool. We used the word discotheque and called ourselves disco DJs. I only started to realize how significant all this was later.
It still tears me up.
Fast Frankie Crocker, a radio station WMCA in New York, reaches one of the biggest and youngest audiences in the country. Every promoter wants his song on Fast Frankie's show.
Frankie Crocker from WBLS #1 radio in New York City would come to the garage and steal things from Larry or force him to give it to him. And then the next day, you'd hear records on WBLS that were not going to come out for 6 months, and that suddenly everybody was crying to get a copy of and could not buy it because it's not out.
All these record companies were like, get Larry this record. Get Larry this record. It'll be on the radio next week. The DJ had power in those days. Like Larry's fame made the garage bigger. Then the garage itself got so big, it made Larry's fame even bigger. And when I would go overseas to work or visit other countries, they'd be, the garage, the garage, the garage. That's when I realized to myself, I said, wow, the garage has infiltrated Europe and in other countries. This is incredible. I mean, it's just really a simple little weekend club, but it became more than that.
The best discotheque DJs are underground stars, discovering previously ignored album cuts and obscure singles with the power to make the crowd scream. I had been reviewing records for Rolling Stone for a while. There were a lot of records that were remaining fairly underground, that were not on the radio, that had not been chart records, but they were extremely popular in New York because people went to dance and heard them. And there was this kind of sense for me that that was not going to be underground for long.
CKLW in the middle of 54 minutes.
During the 1970s, most people were hearing new songs primarily from radio. Radio was very, very powerful.
W Disco IA with more naps on a Wednesday. Just heard from Eric Gale with the old Hall and Outside.
The key to $1 million profits is getting the record on the radio. Larry Lujak, one of the country's top disc jockeys.
I'm convinced that you can make any half-decent record a hit if you play it enough.
Boring. Boring. The underground world didn't want to be playing what the radio was playing.
I only play songs that I believe are good. So if there's a B-side that actually is better than the A-side, then I will play only the B-side. It's part of my job to find good songs that people could dance to.
24 hours a day, always going out, always getting new records, and absolutely had to be on top of it.
I got hired to play on Fire Island. An island.
But there was nothing impoverished about the spirit and self-image of those black men who found their way into an industry that was to become a broadcast phenomenon, which was at that time unique to America, black radio. It was 1949 when WERD in Atlanta went on the air as the nation's first black-owned radio station, when Jesse B. Blayton, a black bank president and professor at Atlanta University, bought the station for $50,000. And it was the legendary jockey Jack Gibson, who became renowned as Jack the Rapper, who was the first voice in America to be broadcast on a black-owned radio station. He spoke to Atlanta, and indeed to history when he said, "Hello America, we're here." Black-owned radio was now a reality. WERD was followed in a matter of weeks by KPRS in Kansas City, owned by the Carter family, as the second black-owned station in the nation. KPRS is still owned by the Carter family, and both KPRS AM and FM are still on the air. It was indeed black radio that gave birth to real personality radio. In fact, blues legend B.B. King began his career as a disc jockey on WDIA in Memphis, Tennessee.
The soul personalities had more of a flair. They were hipper, they were sharper, they had their pulse on not only their audience but the community, as opposed to pop radio where the guys just showed up and did whatever they were supposed to do. Soul radio took chances on artists, took chances on music. Pop stations never did.
First of all, the black audience, black people love music. So here you had radio stations that were programming the music that black people liked. But besides that, you had these extraordinary personalities. You had characters. They were unique individuals, each one of them. They had their own sound. They had their own personas. And they were articulate, which made them appear also to be extremely intelligent. And they were black. They were black in terms of their personas. They were black in terms of their identification with the community, the issues and ideas and problems of the community. And so they created excitement. You know, they created a feeling of identification that the black community would turn to their radio station. And that personality became, you know, like their representative of not just the music, but the culture.
Hello, I'm Ken Spiderweb, and this is the story of Behind the Mic and On the Set. Legends of New York Radio is poised to be a groundbreaking documentary with its comprehensive appraisal of African American radio history from the 1930s to the present day. Historically, black radio had to fulfill all the functions African American people needed. We entertained you, educated, motivated, and just when you needed it the most, we provided spiritual upliftment. We provided the community with a voice in the fight for greater equality. African American DJs not only delivered the latest news and information, but we played records by local black artists that served as a soundtrack for African American empowerment. From the civil rights movement to the election of the first black president, we are the voice of the people. This documentary presents an unprecedented visual history featuring many timeless radio icons, including Hal Jackson, an American disc jockey and radio personality who broke a number of color barriers. Jackson moved to New York City in 1954 and became the first radio personality to broadcast 3 daily shows on 3 different New York radio stations with a listenership of 4 million people every night. And then there was Percy Sutton, a former Manhattan Borough president who co-founded the Inner City Broadcasting Corporation and would become the first African American to own and operate both an AM and FM station in New York City's history. Hal Jackson and Percy Sutton paved the way for myself and my colleagues to be a part of your daily lives. What's your favorite radio memory? Is it Frankie Crocker?
And don't forget, whenever Frankie Crocker isn't on your radio just isn't really on.
Is it Hank Spann?
This is Hank Spann, where that Super 16 touchdown goes off 4 times in this 52-minute music hour.